good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to At America. My name is Genara, one of the e-guides here in At America. If you're new here, At America is the U.S. Embassy's American Center, and our mission is to provide a space for young Indonesians to learn more about the United States. Today, we will be having another session of GED test preparation, reasoning through language arts. But before we start our session today, let's spice things up with a little trivia. Our trivia question for today is it true or false GED test scores considered as passing are broken down into 3 levels? You can submit your answer on our social media platforms, and for those of you who are able to answer the question correctly, will receive a live shout out from us. All right, without further ado, let me introduce you to our facilitator for today, Zakaria Shatkam, a GED qualified instructor. To Zakaria, the time is yours.
Yes, hello, thank you so much, Mark. Thank you. Thank you, At America, and I'm glad to have everyone again here. If this is your first time attending this session, I'm Zach, and I am the instructor of this program. And if this is your second or maybe third time, welcome again. So without wasting our time, we'll dive into the session and talk about what we talked during the first 2 sessions, and we'll go on and talk about what we'll talk about in this session. A lot of talking. Okay, so as you remember, in the previous session, we talked about, maybe I should stay on this slide. In the previous session, we talked about reading comprehension. If you remember from the breakdown of the sessions, I said that the first 2 sessions will be overview. So we overviewed what we should expect or what we can expect during our related test of GED. And in this session, we'll just dive a little bit deeper and talk about some topics that we will be asked about and we have to have knowledge about in the reading nonfiction section of GED test. So what happens during GED tests is you will be given some kind of text. Let's say, for instance, I do like drawing. Some of you might not like it. So during the test itself, what happens is you will have a passage, something like this. Let's say this is page 1. This is page 1. So what you have a topic, like a passage written, and then there will be a question on the side. So the question might be, what is the main idea of this passage? Well, the question, the type of questions that we have covered so far, and the answers you can, as I said in the first day, we talked about the types of questions. So you'll have multiple choice questions or MCQs. You'll have drop-down questions, different types of questions. I'm sure you are familiar with those types. So drag and drop, not those. Sometimes maybe fill in the blanks, but you will be given options. Drop-down, the options will be dropped down anyway. So what you have is, so when you read this passage, sometimes what happens is, so the passage remains the same, but the question changes. Let's say if you go to page 2, if you go to P2, so the passage will be this same passage, but the question on the side will be different. So sometimes when you read a really long passage during the test, don't worry, it's not for that question only. So that's why you don't have to really rush through it. You have to be really patient. You have to read to understand. They're not trying to test how fast you can read. The test is how well you understand when you read. So remember that. But that does not mean you should not manage your time. Be careful about the time as well. Okay, so anyway, that is a bit info about the test. And in today's session, if we go to the next slide, we'll talk about reading nonfiction texts. In the first session, I told you, I'm sure you are familiar with this, Nonfiction basically means it's not made up. Fiction meaning it's made up. You know, when you watch movies, some movies are based on true stories, some are not, most are not. So they are actually fictions. And the next one is we'll talk about understanding the main idea of a text. If you remember, during the previous session, I told you a few things about the main idea. And the main idea is always the central idea, the idea that if you read the text and if you analyze it correctly, you will find that either all or at least most of the text is about that idea. Either, most of the points made there, they either support the main idea directly or they support the main idea indirectly. And the next one is practicing, as always. You should not rely on this class only to pass the GED test. So my suggestion and my advice, this is the beginning, so I think maybe the timing is great as well. So my advice to you all is study on your own. Have some friends over. It doesn't really matter. They can study something else. You can study for GED. Just study, consistently every day. And if you have any questions, right now you have me. You can, write down your questions, and I'll definitely get back to you. In the questions in the question slide or in the question presentation or Q&A presentation of Mentimeter, I noticed there was a question about getting GED vouchers or test vouchers from America. You will be given GED practice tests if you attend as you were told in the first session. If you attend 12 sessions, you will be given GED practice test, which will test you how ready you are, basically GED ready test. Okay, no, let's not go there yet. Before we go there and you read the passage, this is the same passage that we could not work on during the last session. I kept it here because I want to see how you respond and how you read. And if you go to the Mentimeter link that you will see in the next slide, you will have to answer some questions about how difficult or easy you find reading and understanding these types of passages. Okay. Now, if you are using your computer, great. If you're using your phone, if you have only one device, you go to your browser. If you have only your phone, if you have only your computer, go to your browser. And if you only have your phone, then go to the Mentimeter application and you're ready. Because the next slide, when I switch to the next slide, I'm not going to do anything. You will have to read the passage. Okay. And I don't know how to do this. How do you do this? Do this? Yeah, maybe like this. Okay. And answer the question. Okay. The questions. Answer the questions. You will have 10 minutes to read the passage and answer the questions. That's for all the questions. So good luck. There will be 5 questions for the next slide. Now, let's go to the next one and be ready. By the way, as Faisal has sent in the chat, if you have any questions, yes, like external questions, and if you have, something in mind that has remained unanswered, please go to that Mentimeter. Go to Mentimeter's website or application and enter that code and write down your question. Anyway, let's go to the next slide and read the passage. I'm going to start. Okay. I'm going to start the timer. And your time starts now. If you are unfamiliar with Mintmuir, this is the code. When you go to the website or application, you just enter this code and you will be taken to a presentation, and there you can answer the questions that you see there. Anyway, let's go. Your time starts now. If you have any questions, as always, please feel free to write them down in the chat box. Good luck. Okay, 16 people have answered the first question, but only 14. The two of you who have not answered the last question, please. You have like 45 seconds or something. Now you have 45. Anyway, I hope you found the questions easy. I hope, if not easy, it's fine. If you even found them difficult, what's most important is that you know how to answer them. So once you know how to find the right answer, it's fine. If you find it difficult right now, after a few practice and after knowing more strategies and after, attending all these sessions, you will definitely get better and you will definitely on your way to answer them faster. Okay, time is up. And let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is the next slide, and I'm going to show you how to answer them. So to present it, the first one, I don't know. Yes, now it's good. So as you can see, so the question is, what word would be most accurate to describe Washington's feelings towards being president? If you read the passage, and if you come to, let me use a highlighter. Again, if you remember from the previous session, I told you to always read the first paragraph, which is the introduction paragraph. Okay, this should not work this way. Highlighter, and let's use green. So the first paragraph is the introduction paragraph. And if you look at the first paragraph here, which this seems to be messed up. If you look at the first paragraph starts with talking about George Washington and him speaking as President of the United States and what the speech was and what the speech represented. And it talks about, kind of sets up the scene where the speech took place and why he spoke. If you look at the second paragraph, and then you get to the point where it's the about speech itself. It talks about, the speech being very simple, talks about change, it talks about, the speech being about amendments, and talks about why this speech was so significant and what difference it made. Okay, and if you look at the last paragraph, it is asked by, it may sound odd, which means it may sound strange, it may sound weird or bizarre. But George Washington did not run for president of the United States, which means he did not have the intention of becoming the president. He did not want to be the president. Oh, explains it here. No, Bashi explains it. We don't need to really analyze it. So George Washington hesitated at first about becoming president, but he served 2 terms in office. So the word hesitated tells you that he had doubts, which means he did not want to be the president. He did not actually run for presidency, but he had doubts. I mean, this answer B. This is actually the answer to this question. He was unsure about it. He had doubts. If you go to the next slide, then you will see, and then right now I have to erase all of this from here. If you go to the next slide, the question is, what ideas about the Constitution did Washington discuss during his speech? Now let's look at the options. First option is ideas about how to teach about the Constitution. If you read the passage, you cannot find the word teach, let alone teaching about the Constitution or how to teach the Constitution. As I said, if you go to the second paragraph, from our first reading, we understood that the first paragraph is the introduction. It sets up the scene. It talks about where this speech takes place. The second one is about the speech itself. And the third one, fun fact. Some people talk about something and then say, hey, fun fact about that. This was not true about that. Anyway, so it may sound odd. That is the, this passage way of saying fun fact. Okay, so now Washington kept his speech very simple. Great. So he spoke about ideas for amendments, changes or additions to the Constitution. He finished by asking for a divine blessing on the American people and their elected representatives. By making the speech, Washington did more than was necessary, or what was necessary. The Constitution required only an oath of office. Washington established a tradition of making a speech that every elected president in American history has followed. Now, if you look at here, you kind of find this first option. So just from the get-go, you know that the first option is not correct. This one is not correct. So no. If you look at the other option, ideas about amendments, just by looking at it, oh, amendments, yeah, it's mentioned in the passage. Okay, let's see. If you read the second paragraph, Washington kept his speech very simple. He spoke about ideas for amendments, changes or additions, which means, adding to the amendments or changing the amendments. You will, if you go on and say social studies, then you will know what it takes to change an amendment and what it takes to add an amendment. Anyway, he does not talk about the other options. He does not talk about ideas about a new constitution. The Constitution remains the same. He just talks about amendments, which are some, there you have amendment number 1, which is free speech for the United States. The second one is the right of bearing arms. The third one, I don't remember, I think. Again, there are the first 10 amendments of the Constitution of the United States, they're all about, personal freedom and freedom of the American people. So, those amendments, they give right to the American people. So they are mostly about human rights and the rights of American citizens. Anyway, he does not talk about changing the Constitution. Changing the Constitution would mean changing the whole Constitution, throwing away all these amendments and making a new Constitution. He does not talk about that. He simply talks about changing or adding to the amendments. The third option is ideas about how to protect the Constitution. He does not talk about it. Again, at least according to this passage. Remember, in the previous session, I told you, always focus on what you read. They say someone who knows about America and someone who knows about the Constitution and someone who has actually read Washington's speech as the first president of the United States. That person might come and say, okay, oh, no. He actually talked about how to protect the Constitution. He actually talked about, like how to teach the Constitution to the American people. Yes, but in this passage, he did not. So that's why always remember to focus only on the text that you read. There are some texts that they kind of expect you to know about some popular ideas or some ideas that are globally known. Or, nonfiction texts, stay and answer only based on the text. I cannot say this enough. Anyway, let's go to the next slide. The next slide, the question is, who was George Washington addressing when he gave his first inaugural address? At least I'm glad I do not see all four options here. So the House of Representatives and a joint session of Congress. So if you know about the American government and how it works, then you know that they have two houses of representatives. One is actually called the Senate, the other one is called House of Representatives. So when the Senate and member of House of Representatives, when they come together and have a session, that is called a joint session of Congress. They both are Congress. Anyway. And if you read the passage, in the first paragraph, as I mentioned, it talks about where the speech takes place. He spoke to a joint session of Congress. This is mentioned, specifically. This is not something that is implied. You don't have to read between the lines to know this. So he spoke to a joint session of Congress. I simply don't read too much into it. Sometimes I know some of you I have done this a lot. Some of you might do this as well. Some of you might try to, be too smart and say, oh no, it's impossible for them to have put the answer of this question right, there for the reader to see. Yes, they have done it. And you don't have to be like, no, I have to figure this out. I have to become Sherlock Holmes or something. Anyway, the next one is, what is the main idea of this text? Again, as we spoke about main idea, we said the main idea of a text is the central idea. It is the idea that is supported throughout the text. You don't see any. You see supports for that idea. You do not see, any other idea as much mentioned as the main idea. So again, anyway, every text, every book, no matter how small or how big, they have one main idea. Might have, some really other great ideas or big ideas, but they have one main idea anyway. That's called main idea. Yeah. Anyway, so if you read the options, the first option that I see here you've chosen is George Washington. Two people have chosen that. George Washington asked for a divine blessing on the American public because he cared about the American people. True. No one asks that for the people they do not care about. That is true. But is that the main idea of this text? Nope, it is not. Do you see anywhere else where, the passage talks about, him asking for a divine blessing? So it's just, a tiny portion of the passage. It's not the main idea of this passage, the central idea. The idea, if you remove that, how much of the information have you lost? If you remove it from the passage, I mean, not much, I guess. So if you go to the next option, 5 people have chosen that. George Washington's first inaugural address talked about ideas for how to make changes or amendments to the Constitution. Yes, true. It is. Now let's see how much support it has. Let's go and find out the support for the option that 5 of you have chosen. Okay, George Washington's first inaugural address talked about ideas for how to make changes. Okay. Yep. And that's it. See? That's it. And same as for the divine blessing. And if you read the other options, George Washington gave the first inaugural address in 1789. Good. And then continues where he talked about ideas for the Constitution and set a precedent for future presidents. Okay, now let's see how much of this whole passage this covers. Okay, let's go to the paragraphs. Okay, the first paragraph sets up the scene. Good, it's mentioned. First inaugural address, usually inaugural address is given, to the joint session, and these days the public attend them too. Okay, so that is covered here. And 1789, yep, talked about ideas for the Constitution. Okay, see, this one is covered in this answer as well. And then if you look at this, it talks about this out of the second paragraph as well. Setting up a precedent basically means doing something for the first time and then people following you. Okay. Yep, that is it. And those were the 4 questions that you needed to answer. By the way, if you have any questions and you want to ask me, please feel free to do so. And let's go to the next slide. The next slide, we're going to talk about today's session. Again, when we talk about identifying the main idea of a text, when we talk about that, we have to ask ourselves, what is the idea that holds this whole passage together? See? So if you remember from the, from session 2, we spoke about coupons and coupons not not being worth it, or not being worth using. And we also talked about my handwriting being bad, and the truth about coupons, my handwriting being bad, and also an honorable thief. No, we did not talk about that one. We talked about clowns. Why clowns? Why being called a clown is not always a bad thing, and why being a clown is not always bad. And clowns, they can do things that a normal human being, or at least someone who's not a clown or someone who's not in the comedy business, can do. Okay, so identifying the main idea. Again, read the whole passage. Read. Let me write this in this one. Read. Okay, read everything. When I say everything, I mean everything. When you read, when you look at a passage, let's say the passage, and your estimation is that the passage has 500 words. 500 words. How long do you think it takes you to read it? I mean, to read it and understand it, not just, reading the words and by the end of it not knowing anything. Reading and understanding it might take you 5 minutes, I guess, because 500 words, it's not that long. A passage of that has 500 words, not that long. So 5 minutes. If you spend 5 minutes and read it carefully, you will not have to spend a lot of time on answering the questions. So when you read the first question, great, I have read it. Okay, oh yes, I know. Or even if you have not understood everything perfectly, fine. At least you know where to find the answer to the question. If you read, then come back to the first one. Okay. So if you go to this one, who was George Washington? Should be whom? So who was George Washington addressing when he gave his first inaugural address? Okay, great. Now, if you have read the passage, let's say I have read the passage, but I don't really know whom he was talking to. Then I know, okay, I remember this is in the first paragraph. This is At least I know this. And I don't have to read the whole passage to find the answer to this question again. So that's why you have to read to understand, which will later on help you find out the answer of the question. Let's say question 2 is about a certain sentence. Read the sentence and choose one of the options, and choose what the author means by this sentence, and then you are given 4 options. Then again, you have to have read the whole passage to know where to find that sentence. Otherwise, you'll have to read the whole passage again to come across that sentence, and then go back and answer the question. And if you don't read well the first time, then you'll have to read again and again for each question, which takes more time. Anyway, read. And when you read, ask yourself, again, just like in the previous session, what is the topic? Once you have understood the topic, and then ask yourself, what is the biggest point? I'm not going to say idea because I want to confuse you. What is the biggest point? And then the third one, again, what is what is the most supported point? Okay, let's go back to the passage. If we come here and let me go to the last question, maybe. And I'm using my other screen to make sure you see this. Okay, let's do this. Okay, we said ask the topic. The topic is George Washington's speech, right? First speech. The idea, we know from reading this text, we know that the idea is this. George Washington giving his speech in 1789, and I'm giving this speech to a joint session of Congress, and him talking about making amendments to the Constitution, and lastly, setting a precedent for the future presidents to follow. And if you read the whole passage is actually covered by this one simple answer. This speech is known as the first presidential inaugural address. If you know the US and if you know George Washington, then you know he was the first president of the United States. Then you know that, okay, this is again about his speech. If you look at the second one, and you know the United States government, then you know that this usually happens, and this is something that has been happening since 1776, if I'm not mistaken. And if you read the second paragraph again, it's about the speech itself. I'm not going to bore you again. Main idea, biggest idea. Main idea, the most important idea. Main idea, if you remove it, the whole passage actually, looks like, talks about different things without mentioning or without making any point. Again, it's very simple. I don't want to confuse you saying that, okay, main idea is this really complicated thing that you have to find out. You have to, become Sherlock Holmes, as I said. Main idea, basically, biggest idea for text. It doesn't really matter whether that text is written for grade 3 or whether that text is written for grade 12 or for a college subject. It doesn't matter. Yes, the level of the difficulty might matter, but always main idea, biggest idea, most supported idea, the idea that can represent the whole passage. Now, when you see something like that, when you say, okay, maybe this is the main idea of this passage, okay, ask yourself, can I find support for that? Let's say you have this idea. Let's say idea A, for option A, you're like, okay, great, yes, I think this is the biggest idea of that passage. Great. Okay, look for support. Find support. Can you do it? Do you find support? Is it? Okay, great. Now, option B, if you look at it, you can see, oh, this is also supported. Great. Let's do it. Let's find support for this one as well. Okay, let's see which sentences support what. Let's see which sentences support this option. Again, as I said I think either in the first session or second session, out of the 4 options that you will be given, you can almost always rule out 2 of them as nonsensical answers, saying that, okay, these answers, they don't make any sense. They're not even mentioned in the passage. That's why. But like about teaching, how to teach the Constitution of the United States. Does not talk about it. It's not mentioned anywhere in the passage. So you can always rule out those options, and you'll always have, not always, maybe mostly, you'll have 2 options very close to one another, talking about almost the same thing, but only one of them can be right. So you have to be really careful. If you hear a sound, there is a thunderstorm here. Sorry about that. Okay. So option A, you have found support for it, and option B as well. Now ask yourself, which one of them is, again, when I say support, I'm sure you know you're looking for direct support. Just like, let's say, if you say, oh, option A is George Washington making the speech as the first president of the United States. Okay, great. And then it talks about, there is a paragraph that talks about George Washington setting up a precedent. Again, as I said, when you do something the first time and it's followed, you are setting up a precedent for people to follow. Anyway, so you have found all the direct supports. Now look for indirect supports. So is option A directly supported by 5, let's say, and option B is also 5, and then you say, is option A supported indirectly by any sentence in the passage? And you see, oh, there are 3 sentences or 3, let's say, evidence that support option A, but for option B, you can only find, let's say, 1. And then you go on and read. I'm sure that at the end, you will find out that even these 5 points and option B itself somehow supports option A. So again, find the most supported point in the whole passage. Find the biggest idea in the passage. Find the central idea in the passage. Find the idea that if you remove it from the passage becomes in shambles. The passage does not make any sense, or at least most of these things. The passage is lost. Wow. Okay. So that is for main idea. If you go to the next one, we said, when you find, let's say, you're reading a text, sometimes what happens with nonfiction text is that you're reading a text, but you don't really notice it. Kind of, you notice subconsciously, but you don't consciously know what type of, what structure is the text following. So, sorry if you can hear it. And someone please let me know if you hear the noise here. If it's noisy, my background. Okay. So if you read a text, it doesn't really matter. It has a structure. And sometimes text, non-fiction text. Do you hear the noise? Please do let me know in the chat. If not, great, I'll continue without anyway. So identify the text, the structure of the text, or the text structure. So when you read something, the structure might be written in chronological order. Oh, sorry, yeah, sorry for the noise. Yeah, yep, it is noisy. It seems okay. Maybe I'll bring my microphone closer so you can at least hear my voice as the main sound coming from my side. Anyway, when you say chronological order, and you do that, let me fix my microphone. Okay, so if it's too disturbing, please do let me know so I can change. So when you say chronological order, it means it talks about something the way it happened, or in the sequence that it happened. Things happen in sequence, sometimes simultaneously, usually in sequence. Yeah. Okay, if you look at this, let's say it talks about in 19, let's say 20, this thing took place, and later on in 1921, this thing took place. And it goes on and talks about in 1980, this thing took place. And what you usually see is first, okay, or maybe phrases like after that. This is what you usually see. And then phrases like, before this happened, before something, this happened. This we usually see with nonfiction texts that are written in chronological order. Anyway, this is what you usually see. And if you want to take a screenshot, if you need it, do it. Otherwise, I'm going to clean this and write about the next one. So the next one, give this a chance, 3, 2, 1, on. The next one is sometimes you might read a text, and like the first paragraph of this text, it describes. It is describing something. It is when you see. Let me remove describing. Let me say it kind of sets up the scene, or sets up the environment. And talks about like where it happened, kind of how it happened. And this is actually more important than this sequence. So within the order that it happened. Sometimes you see the text actually explaining different incidents in order, and sometimes you see that no, it talks about something that happened in 2000 first, and then goes on and talks about something in 1920. Okay. And then if you go on, you will see things like, really, really descriptive words like beautiful. This nose is getting too much. Please let me know if it is disturbing to you. Okay. Again, I think we'll go on to the next one before we run out of time. This is really bothering me. So ask questions. As I said in the first sentence, ask questions. What is the author trying to say? What is the author trying to say? Or what is being said? What is the author saying? Great. Again, what point? Find out the main idea. What point is most supportive? And again, we go on and say, okay, and use, okay, now I know what the text is about. I know what the author is trying to say. I know what point is most supported, or the most supported point. And I know in what order things happen. This happens only and only when you understand the text. If you're just reading, as I said, just for the sake of reading it, you do not understand these things. When you ask questions, okay. And another way I think that can help you is trying to put yourself, in the text. As I said, I think in the second session as well. Try to imagine. Imagine a world within the passage. So if you go to the previous passage that we just read, so the world there is that the author talks about, George Washington being the first president of the United States. The author talks about George Washington making the first speech, as the president of the United States. And it goes on and talks about George Washington actually setting up a precedent for future presidents to follow. Okay, we have asked questions, we have understood the text. Again, if you do all these, then this happens. If you understand the main idea, if you identify it, if you recognize it, if you know what the main idea is, then you know what to look for. You know which points support the main idea, and then you have identified the structure of the text. You know, okay, this text actually talks about the incidents or the points in sequence, in order. And then if you ask questions like, okay, great, I know these things. What are you saying to me? What is your point? Ask the text this question. What is your point? What are you trying to say? Okay, is it supported? Oh, that's your point. Is it supported? Let me look for supports. Let me see if I can find any support for that point. And then you have understood the text and exactly what it's talking about. Okay. This is another way of practicing and making sure that you have understood a text. Try to summarize the text. If you summarize the text in your own words, what sentence do you think you can come up with? Let's say for the previous passage, for the passage about George Washington being the first president of the United States, basically a father of the USA. If you could summarize that passage in only one word, in only one sentence. So how would that sentence look like? Try to summarize and retell. Retelling is basically kind of testing your memory to see how much you remember about the text and how much you know about the text and how much of the text you have understood. The next one is main idea and supporting detail. Main idea and supporting detail, we talked about it. There is no need to go through it again. I'm going to mute myself and see if I can do something about the notes I have around me. And by then, if you have any questions about this whole session or the previous sessions, please do go here and let me know about your questions, and I'll just come back and read them. Let me see if I can solve the issue of the noise. Okay. If you have not asked your questions, do go there and ask me your questions. And if you don't have any questions, either you don't understand what I talk about, or I don't talk well. Okay. Now let me see if I can find any questions there. For the first session, I also remember one of the questions was about reading comprehension and how you can improve it again. If you just go to Google and if you just go to Google and search for reading comprehension passages, I'm sure you'll find a lot of reading comprehension passages that you can go through and read them and answer the questions that you see there. And if you cannot find those reading comprehension passages, please do let me know. I'm sure I can, show you some resources, share some resources with you, and definitely, I'll definitely try to help you. Okay, great. So, okay, one of the questions is that, is George Washington the President of the United States? George Washington was the President of the United States. He was the first President of the United States. He was, the commander, I think, of the revolution against the UK in 1776. I think on July 4th, the US, at the time they were colonies, so they announced their independence and they said, okay, we're going to fight the UK with the Queen. We don't really accept them. And that's when they declared independence. And that's when the first president of the United States, George Washington, was elected. Okay, to get GED vouchers, yes, me. Okay, so where did he give his speech? As it said, it's in the Federal Hall in front of a joint session of Congress. Okay, that is it for the questions. And if you found reading those passages easy, great. Now let's go, and we have a lot of practice coming in. In the next session, we will actually dive deeper into main ideas, supports, and cause and effects and different. By the way, if you did not understand a text structure, it's fine. I just talked about it just so you know there are different structures that you can write a text in. If you did not get it completely, it's fine. We'll talk about all these structures one by one. Okay, great. I have seen your questions and your questions are answered. Let's go and do and practice it. Anyway, the next one again, before we go there, open your Mint Mirror and be ready. For this one, because it's only one passage, and when you go to Mentimeter, you will see only one question. You have only 3 minutes. You have 6 of them coming. So be ready. The code for this one is 15251202. 1525 1202. And by the way, all the questions are about main ideas. So when you read them, when you read the passages, make sure that you look for the main idea. I hope everyone's ready, and your time starts now. And after the 3 minutes end, I'll go to the next slide. And by the way, there is only one question per passage. Don't go to the next question unless I am on the next page. I know I am on the same page that you see the question about. This is passage 1, and you should answer the question that has the title passage 1. Okay, great. Your time starts now. Okay, great. I have received only 7 responses. Come on, guys, for the next one. Everyone be ready. Let me make sure that, yep. This is the second passage, and you cannot go to the second slide without me approving you. I have to stop it. Okay, this for the next one, and your time starts now. Everyone, this is for passage 2, for the passage that is on the screen, passage 2. Do not write your answers for passage 1 here, please. Yes, this for passage 2, the passage that you see on your screen in the presentation. Passage 2, read this new passage and answer the question. One passage cannot have too many ideas. So that's why I'm not going to ask you to give me main idea of 2 passages, 1 passage or in 2 different slides. Okay? Good. Now let's start again. This time only. Only and only. Answer the question about 1 passage that is on the screen, and then when you go to the next screen, you answer about the question about the next screen's topic. The next slide is not going to be about the same topic. I hope it's clear now. Okay, you have 2 minutes. Okay, great. Now I am going to go to the next passage first, And then I'll go to the next slide on Mintmirror and write down your answers to next slide's passage, this one, passage 3. And when you look at the question that is written in Mintmirror, you will see it's written passage 3, what is the main idea of this passage. So which means that you have to read passage 3 and then write the main idea in the answer box of Mintmirror about this passage. Okay, your time starts now. Okay, why does it not work? Good. Okay, again, we will go to the next passage. And this time for passage 4, I'll give you 1 extra minute. I'll give you 4 minutes. So you can spend the first 3 minutes just reading the passage and understanding the passage. And in the 4th minute, write down 1 sentence. It doesn't have to be long. You don't have to summarize the whole passage. Right? I'm just asking you, what is the point of the passage? And by the way, I have noticed that some of you answered a question like, so how this thing happened. You say, so like how gravity the gravity or the Earth's gravity, for instance. When you say how, what do you mean by how? When you write that down, that's the main idea of the passage. Okay? So try to answer this how. How? How was the gravity discovered, or how gravity was discovered? Okay? So how was gravity discovered? Answer this how, and you'll have the main passage. Just knowing something, how, let's say, if I read this and I say, okay, how this thing happened. The intention is to read the whole thing, understand it, summarize it, let's say, in your mind, and then write down a point that you think is the most supported point in the whole passage. Write that down. Okay? Now for the next passage, I'll give you 4 minutes. Okay, if you are on Mintmere, you can see that the voting will be closed in 30 seconds. So please answer the question before then. Okay, and when the voting closes, that's when I'll go to the next passage, which is passage 5, and then I'll go to the next slide on Mintmere, and you can write your answer for the next one. Be quick, I have only 15 seconds. For this one as well, you have 4 minutes, and then I'll give you maybe some extra time on Mintmere. Okay, everyone, the time is almost up. But what I'll I'll do is maybe if we can borrow, maybe just a very maybe tiny portion. If you have any questions, please go to this Mentimeter code. Please go to Mentimeter and write down this code, and then you can ask me your questions. I'll definitely, please visit Notion's page. There are different passages there. You can watch this whole video again. I'll definitely share some resources, videos, web pages there as well. Again, use that resource. You won't forget it. Anyway, if you have any questions, go to this code, go to the Mentimeter and write down this code and ask your questions. Thank you. I think that would be it.
All right. Thank you so much for Zakaria for today's session. I hope that everyone can gain a lot of knowledge and insights from today's session, especially for those of you who are preparing for GED. All right. Now, earlier in this session, we asked audience members a trivia question. And that question was, is it true or false? GED test scores are considered as passing are broken down into 3 levels. And the correct answer to that is true. The categories are high school equivalency, college ready, and college ready plus credit. Shout out goes out to at @mr_yawari from Instagram for answering the question correctly. And thank you so much to everyone else who has also participated. And now you may be wondering, how can I create an event or perhaps contribute my ideas for Ad America? It's very easy. You can visit our website at www.atamerica.or.id, and then you can select create an event and collaborate with us. All event proposals coming to us will be reviewed, and your event might be featured with us soon. Don't forget as well to follow us on our social media. We've got Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and also YouTube at AT America. By following us on our social media, you can gain our event updates, fun content, and so much more. All right, with that, I think it is time to say goodbye. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Again, my name is Genara, and see you soon, everyone. Thank you.